Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. We're going back to August 1926 to relive the frantic, real-time shock that absolutely gripped the world. We're zeroing in on the final 10 days of Rudolph Valentino. You know him, right? He wasn't just a movie star. He was a literal global phenomenon, the original Latin lover and the absolute center of the cinematic universe after starring in The Chic. But today, we aren't talking box office numbers or acting methods. We're tracking how the public watched, day by day, headline by hastily typed headline, as their biggest icon fought for his life. Let's get right into it and experience this exactly as they did.
So we start our timeline on August 14th. Picture this, a perfectly healthy 31-year-old icon having a totally normal night out in New York City. He's at the absolute peak of fame and physical condition. Now, what's really terrifying here is the sheer speed of what happens next. Remember, this is the 1920s. There's no 24-hour news network, no internet, no instant updates. People relied entirely on the rumble of the printing presses. And the news about to hit those presses? Well, it was so incredibly sudden and so deeply shocking that it would practically paralyze the nation overnight.
You can really feel the whiplash the public experienced just by reading a paper like the Omaha Morning Bee a couple of days later. The front page blares in massive font, "Valentino seized by appendicitis is operated upon." And the subhead totally captures the frantic panic of the moment. Famed movie star suddenly collapses in his New York City apartment. Surgeons act quickly. Just imagine for a second picking up your paper over morning coffee and reading that about a guy who, literally hours before, seemed totally invincible on thousands of movie screens.
Let's break down that rapid-fire sequence of events on what started as a quiet Sunday, August 15th. Right before noon, Valentino is just resting in his suite at the prestigious Hotel Ambassador. Only his valet is there. Then, out of absolutely nowhere, he grabs his stomach in blinding agony and completely passes out. His manager, S. George Ullman, and a close friend are rushed in. Suddenly, a calm Sunday morning is a literal race against time. By 4:40 p.m., an ambulance is wailing toward New York's Polyclinic Hospital. Just 1 hour later, surgeons are desperately washing up for emergency surgery.
Now, the absolutely crucial point here is that this wasn't just your standard appendectomy. Valentino was suffering from a perforated gastric ulcer and acute appendicitis at the exact same time. Without modern antibiotics, this was a catastrophic combo. A perforation is serious today, sure, but back in 1926, stomach contents leaking into the abdomen basically meant almost certain deadly infection. So surgeons had to pull off this grueling, highly dangerous double operation to try and fix both critical failures at once. It was a trauma so severe he was completely unconscious until midnight. The doctors were incredibly cautious at first, stating we wouldn't even know the true outcome for days. The whole world just held its collective breath. But by August 17, the narrative actually starts to shift toward cautious optimism. You get headlines like, "Valentino worries about Paula as she worries about him." The official medical bulletins, which the public was eagerly devouring, by the way, noted his condition wasn't causing undue anxiety. Visitors were strictly barred from the hospital room, but the press ran wild with the romantic human element. They reported how Valentino, even while in severe pain and exhaustion, made his manager wire his fiancée, the actress Paula Negri, all the way out in Hollywood so she wouldn't be frightened. It gave everyone this warm, fuzzy feeling, like, hey, if he's worried about his romance, he must surely be pulling through, right? And the actual clinical data seemed to beautifully back up that soaring hope. Between August 17 and the 20th, the doctor's regular bulletins fed a desperately hungry public with some genuinely positive signs. He was passing fairly comfortable nights, his fever broke, dropping his temperature to 101.5 degrees, and his pulse steadied right at 100. He even hit a massive milestone, consuming his first real nourishment since the illness began, just a few sips of simple chicken broth. Officially, the medical team cited satisfactory progress. Honestly, you can practically feel a powerful collective sense of relief starting to wash over the country. By August 19, these triumphant headlines completely convinced everyone that the rugged, youthful star had officially beaten the odds. The Atlanta Journal proudly declared, "Valentino passes critical stage and recovery sets in." Newspapers everywhere were excitedly hyping up his youthfulness, his athletic build, and his rugged constitution, basically saying those traits were exactly what saved him. The narrative was totally cemented. The great Rudolph Valentino had stared death right in the face, won, and was definitely on his way back to the silver screen. But here comes one of the most tragic reversals in Hollywood history. On August 21st, Valentino actually felt so much better, so invigorated, that he asked his doctors to let him pack up and go recover back at his hotel. His doctors, knowing the deep unseen risks, immediately shut that down and insisted he stay perfectly still in bed. Then, on August 22nd, the fatal turn hit, out of nowhere. Pleurisy, a severe stabbing inflammation of the tissues lining the lungs, suddenly developed in his left chest. That local peritonitis in his abdomen, which had already been quietly, invisibly spreading despite the surgery, suddenly became overwhelming. Instantly, the tone of the news completely darkened. Just look at the Banner Herald on August 22nd. Rudolph is not out of the woods quite yet. That breezy optimism from the previous week evaporated in a flash. The public, who truly thought their idol was saved, was suddenly hit with this terrifying whiplash reality. They were realizing his condition was actually growing desperate by the hour.
And the clinical data behind that headline painted a truly terrifying picture. By 4 p.m. on August 22nd, his body was losing the war. His pulse raced out of control to 120 beats per minute, his breathing was strained at 22 breaths per minute, and his internal temperature skyrocketed to a life-threatening, delirious 104.2 degrees. The 3 seasoned doctors who'd been with him since the surgery were so alarmed by this violent spike that they immediately called in a 4th specialist for an emergency consult. Valentino spent a restless, completely agonizing day as the infection just raged. Which brings us to the quiet, frankly harrowing morning of August 23. This midnight bulletin from the Daily Kennebec Journal sets the grim, ticking clock for his final day. Film star still near death, word given at midnight. The simple starkness of that headline really says it all. Any lingering hope from that joyful weekend was entirely erased. The world woke up on a Monday morning to the sobering realization that it wasn't a question of if he would recover, but whether his heart could simply survive the day. So now we are locked into the final grueling hours, tracking a minute-by-minute battle against an unstoppable infection. At midnight, he was barely clinging to life. Throughout the early morning, the toxemia from the peritonitis fundamentally ravaged his vital organs, leading to a final, fatal relapse that his deeply weakened system just couldn't fight off. The doctors, despite using absolutely every medical tool available to them in 1926, had entirely given up hope. The clock ticked relentlessly toward noon, and his breathing slowed. And then, the end. At exactly 12:10 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, inside the quiet, sterile walls of Polyclinic Hospital, Rudolph Valentino, the world's most famous, most adored man, passed away. The agonizing 8-day fight was over. The news rippled across the country in an absolute instant. Papers were scrambling, printing massive special editions, throwing out whatever else they had planned for the front page. The Griffin Daily News printed the heavy words, "Claimed by death." The Day in Connecticut reported he dies of pleurisy after an 8-day battle. And out in North Dakota, the Bismarck Tribune simply and starkly printed 3 undeniable words, "Film star dead." That hopeful, romantic media circus of the past week was instantly, permanently transformed into a massive wave of unified national grief. It really leaves us with this haunting question to ponder as we wrap up our explainer. How does a seemingly invincible 31-year-old icon, at the absolute, untouchable peak of human fame, fall to an 8-day illness just as the world confidently thought he was saved? It's a stark, terrifying reminder of the absolute fragility of life. We can look back at those fading yellowed newsprints from August 1926 and still perfectly feel the collective, breathless shock of a world realizing that no amount of fame, youth, or global adoration can stop the clock when time finally runs out.